So you guys, I'd love to welcome to the stage Lydia Zhang, who is a business development associate at Planet, where she helps connect space for the betterment of Earth. Previously, she was a data scientist at McKinsey Acre, an agriculture-focused solution, and an MS graduate at MIT Technology Policy Program. Geospatial data and its broader impact on business and sustainability have been the key focus of her career growth. Welcome, Lydia. Thank you. You can go ahead and sit down. Next, I'm going to bring on stage Emily Logan from Atlas AI. Emily is a spatial data science project manager at Atlas AI. Atlas is a public benefit corporation that uses satellite imagery, machine learning, and big data sources to create an up-to-date and dynamic view of how the global economy is changing and inform high-resolution predictive analytics. Emily works with organizations such as the Rockefeller Foundation and MyAgro to deliver these capabilities. Thanks, Emily. Next up is Bobby Shackelton from Climate Engine. Bobby is the Chief Product Officer for Climate Engine and helps lead the commercialization and product strategy. In his previous role as Bloomberg's head of Geospatial, he helped standardize TCFD climate reporting and introduce techniques for using geospatial technology to help quantify physical climate risk for financial analysts. And next, Chad Jennings, who you guys already saw today, right, at the keynote, so welcome back, Chad.
Thank you.
Do I have to reintroduce you with the, no, I'm just kidding, it would be my pleasure. Chad is the product manager for data analytics and is the geospatial product lead at Google Cloud, so one of my esteemed peers and colleagues. Chad is the founding product manager for BigQuery's geospatial capabilities and was integral to the effort to bring Earth Engine to GCP. Thanks so much for being here, Chad. So you guys, I think some of what we wanted to talk about today were the impacts of climate change just feel so big, I think, for all of us, right? It's top of mind for every company, every mutual customer that we're all talking to. But I think because it's so big, oftentimes it's difficult to understand what can we actually do. And what we're seeing is that there's a lot of investment at the local level to do remediation, adaptation strategies to help resolve some of the climate-related issues that our planet is facing. And so today I wanted to talk to all of you guys, because you work on this every single day, about how we can sort of eat this big elephant one bite at a time. So I'm just going to ask a few questions. Is that okay? Lydia, I'm going to start with you. Google likes to think about the data when addressing problems. I think Chad probably talked about that a little bit earlier today. And so with hundreds of satellites going around the Earth every single day, you guys collect a lot of data. So how does Planet think about using this data to impact climate change?
For sure. Thank you, Denise. And yeah, at Planet, our role is to democratizing data and empower government, private sector, and NGOs to make sustainable decisions, whether that decision is looking back and to verifying some of the past decisions we've made or looking ahead to make future decisions. Our role in sustainability is aligned with our mission to make global change accessible, visible, and actionable. So we have seen a lot of cases, and to do that, Planet operates over 200 Earth observation data, as you can see up there, and capture the image of the world on a daily basis. Our products and our data are the key components to many data-driven sustainable solutions, fitting into different use cases, such as measuring the Arctic heat wave, a very recent case, or measuring the coral reef, or coastal erosion, like my colleague Mansi presented yesterday at the Google Cardinal workshop. We also help private sector, financial sector looking into their ESG goals. We help farmers conducting sustainable farming, and so on. And one example that I want to mention is a project called Lihui, where the Norway Ministry of Environment and Sustainable selected Planet as a key data source to provide high resolution and comprehensive data sets over global tropics, for anyone to apply if they want to do data projects regarding to deforestation. So we provide this databases on a very frequent updates for people to do an additional analysis. All of these use cases kind of indicate that we have a broad footprint in sustainability, which we do. And the reason for that, for us being so relevant to this topic, is because all of the sustainability use case eventually comes back to Earth itself. And at Planet, our goal, our role is to provide that daily outlook, that comprehensive outlook of Earth for anyone who's interested in the topic.
It's amazing, Lydia. And thank you, by the way. You're a fantastic partner with Google, just like Cardo. We're thrilled to have you in the Google Cloud Ready Sustainability ecosystem. And I think what's been interesting for me working with you guys the last couple of years is when you think about satellite imagery, it's kind of a different type of data than maybe a lot of us are used to. And so, Chad, this is your sweet spot, right? And you've been working on a lot of technology and tooling within Google Cloud so that people can access things like satellite imagery and remote sensing data and work with it just like they've always worked with traditional data sets. So I know you shared a few things this morning, but can you expand a little bit on what Google Cloud's doing to make that possible?
Sure. And so this is touching back to the 4 pillars of technology that Google's trying to bring as a product suite that we talked about earlier in the keynote. There's, we have products that are aligned to various data types: BigQuery for vector, Earth Engine for raster, Vertex AI, Google Maps platform. So that's all cool stuff. But the point, right? The point of this is to let people interact with like planets data or whatever data they need for their problems so they can do their work. And so, I find Geospatial particularly interesting in this respect because the work that Geospatial do, like types of problems that we are tasked to solve, are often, maybe satellite data notwithstanding, like often small data, huge impact. I actually learned that phrase from somebody who I hope is in the room today. I learned it just later. And so, figuring out where physical assets should go, right? That's a 50-year-long decision that geospatial analytics works on. And so, by having, in Google's case, right, by having this breadth of tools, like you can come and do the good work that you do.
Fantastic. When we're talking about this, Lydia, you mentioned observing the planet. Chad, you just talked about how when I observe the planet, I can think about assets. Emily, the reason that we all love to work with Atlas is because I think you're thinking about humanity in that context and just really understanding the people in these communities where we're touching the planet and building out assets. So I just would love to talk a little bit about what Atlas is doing and share it with the audience because I'm not sure they've all heard your story.
Yeah, thanks. Atlas AI is a company focused on inclusive growth. We were founded in 2018 as a public benefit corporation and by a team of Stanford professors. And the goal was really to commercialize the cutting edge research they were working on, generating socioeconomic data using things like remote sensing, machine learning, and development economics on platforms such as Earth Engine by Google Cloud. We've evolved since our start, and we're really a software engineering company. And our vision is to provide access to data products in areas that are data sparse, and doing that through things like satellite imagery and remote sensing. Ultimately, in order to solve issues like climate change, this data is so imperative for moving the needle forward. And we produce data such as population growth, spending power, infrastructure, access, reliability, pretty much all of these layers here. And these become the building blocks for what we can start to see as a dynamic and up-to-date vision of economic change. And all of these things we can start, all this data provides us with unprecedented visibility into the human and economic changes that are occurring. And when we think about that in terms of sustainability and inclusive growth, like what we're focused on, we see that those 3 aspects, sustainability, inclusion, and growth, are so intricately tied.
Right.
And in order to push the needle forward and to see all of the connections in that and not just leave one aspect alone, because alone it's just not as powerful as that connection, we're producing the data that allows you to do that. So Atlas AI really helps organizations, providing them with the data such as this to start to look at the interconnectedness between sustainability, inclusion, and growth. And ultimately, one of the reasons why sustainability and inclusion are at the forefront of our minds.
It's amazing because I think, just figuring out how to, the communities that could benefit the most from every dollar of investment. And I think you guys have heard amazing presentations during this conference where there is a lot of data about large pockets of population already. But I think what we're seeing is people are moving in unprecedented rates. And so having data about the pockets that don't exist or the pockets that will exist in the next 6 months, being able to use space-based data for that is pretty remarkable. We're so happy to be working with you guys, Emily. And Bobby, that goes to like you, right? So coming from Bloomberg, financial services, I think a lot of people are curious about how financial services is going to play in the sustainability space. Starting to see some new regulations, but again, we talk about like capital markets and the ability to infuse cash to invest in these areas. Like, I would just love to hear your point of view about how FinServ can participate.
No, thank you. It's an exciting time. I think the concept of climate change, climate risk, ESG, if you've heard that term, it's the hottest thing in finance these days. And I think the challenge that we have, and being that hot, there's an insatiable demand for data and a concept of alternative data, which geospatial Earth observations sit at the absolute core of it. And so I think there's this clash that's occurring kind of in the industry that's both opportunistic to everyone in this room, essentially, that we can drive new innovations forward that will actually help influence the policy and the way that they put change into their day-to-day business. And so we're starting to see this tip over based on the availability of new technology and data. You're seeing early innovators, I would say, in the industry really start to adopt these type of data feeds and insights. But I think, to be honest, we're still blocked in some senses in the industry from full action without regulation. And so I think across the world, you're seeing in other countries further than the United States driving that action, and it's now driving systemic change from reporting to risk to research. And that affects where banks will give loans and will inject capital into businesses, into homes, and so forth. So I think it's paramount to actually drive the systemic change, to actually penetrate that industry, but we're not there yet. But I can say in the last 5 years, it's exponentially grown, and I think we're on a tipping point, as we were just chatting about earlier, of this really coming into full motion.
That makes me feel a little bit better, Bobby, because we have a lot of visitors that come to Google, and sometimes Chad and I are asked to present to these visitors about what Google's up to, and I have the good fortune sometimes of talking to these customers about geospatial. And especially when financial services folks come in the room, I always start the meeting with, how many of you use the term geospatial, remote sensing, Earth observation in your daily life? The number of hands that go up, Bobby, it's not a lot. And then I tell them that's why I often don't get invited to cocktail parties either, right? Because of the things we talk about. But basically what I hear from them is that these are new terms to them. This is new types of data. They really don't even understand, in some cases, that they have access to it. They don't understand how that data is going to connect to their existing workflows. Like, do you feel like at Climate Engine that's part of your work and why you partner with folks like Cardo, right? Like, how do we bring these amazing data sets together and put them in a visualization layer or an API or some type of report so we can get these executives to start to understand the power of that information?
Yeah, it's a challenge because I think as geo nerds and advocates, we want to make sure that people understand that that's what's driving these solutions. But our customers don't really care. I'm sorry. What they care about is the insight and the analytics that come out of that. So my recommendation is to make it about the problem. Make it about climate change. It's the geospatial elephant in the room. We all know that's the solution. We don't even have to talk about it. We already know that, right? So I usually, I'll start a conversation with saying, basically, do you believe climate's impacting the economy? It's as simple as that. And if they answer no, the conversation's dead, and I'm just gonna say, all right, have a good day. Right. That's probably not gonna be very productive. But if they say yes, and they almost always do say yes, because it's obvious, it's just the economy is disconnected from the environment. And so what it takes is not just selling an off-the-shelf kind of solution in this case, because it's new and it's innovative. So I think it takes requiring a real dialogue and understanding their problem. And I think at the end of it, if you stick with the problem and helping solve that problem, you just slide the geospatial in the background, and then you're part of that cogwheel that's actually driving the real solution.
I love that answer. And Lydia, I want to go back to you because you are one of these data originators with all of these satellites going around the planet. And I just wonder, like with what Bobby just said and the lack of maybe awareness from some of these executives about the opportunity to use this data, And like you said, the impact on the economy, Bobby, because you talked about NICFI, the program that Planet started. And I think really the point of the NICFI data set was to help people understand deforestation around products like palm oil, which is in 80% of every product we love, right? And so I think people are hurting the environment in order to harvest more palm oil. But I think to Bobby's point, there's a second layer to that there was probably only so much palm oil that you can get out of the planet. And so if all of these companies have it in 80% of their products, it isn't just about the trees, although we love the trees. It's also about understanding what's the viability of these companies moving forward. So do you see that coming up in your financial services conversations where they're starting to think about this data, not just from, like you said, kind of geospatial, climate, like how's this actually going to impact the viability of our companies moving forward and where we invest?
Yeah, love that. It's actually very true. Like, we're not just looking at trees or counting the trees. We're going deeper into that these days to understand, for example, what is the tree species, what is the biomass behind that, and to your point, what is the volume of supply of palm oil tree that still exists or will be impacted. So a lot of the cases are going deeper and deeper into that from a planet imagery or from a satellite imagery in general. And to your point about financial sector, we do see, like to Bobby's point, over the years, there has been this tremendous amount of interest in sustainability and tremendous amount of interest in satellite imagery. But it's a very nerdy term, it's a very new concept. People can't really put them together yet. Over the years, we have the luck of serving many multinational investment bank and credit agencies or insurance companies that are early adopters to this technology, this type of data. For example, we are building a strategic partnership with the Moody's in thinking about ESG, monitoring ESG, particularly on the environmental part. We are working with a lot of different insurance companies on crop insurance, parametric insurance, or just disaster risk assessment. But what we heard and the lessons we keep learning is imagery is not enough for the financial sector. They want index and they want insight. So there's a lot of work for us to build that towards what they need and to work with partners like Bobby's or like Emily's to build out that solution and kind of like present the solution to them rather than just give them very fancy imagery to show the problem.
And Emily, you have to see this, right? Where like we're talking about these, again, like these really broad global topics, pictures from space, remote sensing data. But like you said, they want to know what's happening in specific areas around the globe. And oftentimes these are places where there aren't other data sets, right, Emily, to guide them. So you see that coming together where they want to take these global issues and do local impact?
Definitely. I'd say one of the biggest reasons our data is so valuable is because it provides such a high resolution in those data sparse areas. So you can get a local impact. So you can really localize impact. And so one example that we work with is an organization that provides seed packages and fertilizer to rural farmers in Africa. And one of the key areas that we help them is providing this high resolution data that speeds up their analyses. They can actually impact the farmers much faster with our data and our analysis. Beyond that, it really comes back to an issue of food security too. Mm-hmm. So we're not just talking about providing a company with business solutions either, but we're actually driving impactful change when we're talking about a changing climate. Food security, as we know, is going to impact quality and quantity, and we see it really daily, and especially in those areas in the underserved communities.
Right.
And so it's all about inclusive growth when we're talking about those areas. We're trying to drive not only how we can impact that change, but from when we're talking about our perspective as providing that data, we have to start with identification. So we start out, where are those farmers located? And this is areas where we use satellite imagery and then our machine learning models to generate data on and to answer questions like, where are farmers located? And then going a step further, once we identify the farmers, we can start to look at the interactions. So how are these areas changing in terms of infrastructure, spending power, the weather?
Right.
And then we can start to answer questions on how do we really drive sustainable change, especially when we're talking about food security. Another example of what we're working on is we are in a grant with the Rockefeller Foundation to look at the interconnected pathways to development. And we're doing this through producing data where there literally is none. And in this context, we're looking at all the interconnectedness between different industries like agriculture, air quality, health, transportation. And so we're not just looking at producing data, which is what we're going to do for this grant, but then we're going to bring it all together and see how do we really impact all these interconnected things. So for example, how does electrification impact agriculture when you can actually provide irrigation to areas that didn't have it before? This again goes back to food security, because now you're talking about farmers that typically might be impacted by drought are having an opportunity to actually use irrigation.
Which increases their wages so they can take advantage of other new services.
So sustainable, inclusive growth, and providing all of these answers and data sets at the local level at a high resolution so that you can actually do that in these data sparse areas.
That's amazing. So I hope you guys get like this, and I love Bobby that you say the geo nerd. I encourage anybody to come up to Bobby and talk about his tattoo of the globe. His son's name is Atlas, so he takes this stuff very seriously. But Chad, we're here with Cardo. And I know these concepts that we talked about today are big, right? We're producing all this new types of data. We're trying to impact capital markets and how regulation happens and reporting happens. But none of this is possible unless you can produce visualizations, interactive visualizations that bring this message home. So you're my partner at Google working with Cardo every day. Like, what do you think about that visualization layer to really bring this message home?
Well, I think everybody in this room will understand that powerful visualizations compel your audience to understand and engage them. So like, we won't even spend more time. Like, we need gorgeous visualizations. It just has to happen, otherwise we're not going to be able to communicate. And communication, actually, I think, is the more fundamental quality. So like, without viz, communication doesn't happen. Without Cardo, we have less cool viz, so less communication. What's the impact of that? And that when you're doing these projects that span, like like in the case you were talking about, you have communities in Africa that interact with communities in Northern Africa, and then they interact with communities in Europe. In my case, we do a lot of work with supply chain, and you're sourcing palm oil, and you're worried about deforestation in Indonesia. And the island of Java and the city of Jakarta have different political objectives, yet they both have to collaborate and cooperate somehow to get to prioritize, not deforesting, and to also profitably pull the material out. And so that's where communication is really important, because I think the only way you can really get like this many really disparate sets of people with disparate social goals, disparate political goals, disparate agendas.
Yes.
That you only have a prayer of doing that if you can get everybody on the same page, at least to what the truth of the situation is. And it's not the whole story, but having a really compelling picture, really high quality science, really high quality data, scalable and trusted infrastructure. I mean, it all goes together so that if you can produce this picture, you can get in the case of the island of Oahu here, right? Honolulu and the town of Haleiwa have to decide to do the same things. It's a road, right? It connects them. They can't have the, two people's like, well, I'm not going to prioritize that road and the other one, and the other one to prioritize it. You have to get them together. And so that's I've seen in many sorry, I'm going on, and I know lunch is soon. I know this. But I've seen many, many, many projects at Google, because we have the good luck of like dealing with a bunch, in that you're trying to align action, impactful action, across thousands of miles, right? Other aspects of analytics don't always have this problem, right? It's kind of unique here.
Time and distance.
Yeah, and so you have to communicate the insights of your situation to myriad different constituents with different goals, different agendas, and you get them all to take collective action. Well, at least we're not choosing small problems.
So you guys, like Chad said, we hope that this panel was interesting to you and you guys took something away from it. We know you're heading off to lunch, but we do have a few minutes if there's any questions in the audience. I think they're coming around with mics, so we'll make sure that they see you.
Hi, My name is James. I work for the Department of City Planning here in New York. This panel was really, really interesting, and obviously, as you all mentioned, this topic is super important to everyone. I was curious, and I guess I wanted to maybe question a little bit and push back on some of the framing around kind of the connection or disconnection between economy and environment, and I think the example of palm oil is a great one. And I guess, you know, in many ways right now, economy is, well, let's be quite frank, the sole cause of climate change in the world. I mean, our current global capital structures is basically responsible for all of this. And so my question is, for those of you who are so deeply connected to these issues and working with these amazing data sets and advocating on behalf of so many different groups of folks around the world, how do you understand that framing, and how do you work towards kind of that reframe? How do you disconnect economy from causes of climate change and reconnect economy as a path toward a solution?
Can I defer to our economic and environmental agitator over here? Bobby, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think fundamentally they're completely connected, right? And so I think 100%, 1000% agree. I think what I've experienced or seen over my career is the connection's not made in practice for policy or investment, right? And so the money, it's not quantified in financial systems, for example, right? So I think, you know, the path towards properly connecting it or properly pricing it so we know how expensive the economy is and the impact it makes on the world, it's about rationalizing and structuring this disparate alternative data insights that we're talking about here in a way that's now connective to a traditional decision-making process, right? Whether it's at a stock price for a financial industry or a home loan, you know, for a bank. I feel like there's a structuring both in time, whether it's a certain summary of time, temporal nature, or a certain summary of spatial aggregation. But I think it's that structuring of this unstructured, messy data that we play in that will be the bridge to making it more attributable and forecastable of how the business will impact the world. Hope that answers it.
Anyone else?
Thank you so much. It was a very inspiring conversation. I'm from BlackRock, and in BlackRock we care a lot about not only physical climate risk, but also transition risk. And a lot of that really unfolded to, for example, how should we measure the carbon emission? And there's some, discussion around, for example, using satellite imagery for that. I just wanted to know your idea about, anyone in the panel would be great to understand how do you think about transition risk in satellite imagery, remote sensing in general, and how we can, for example, incorporate all that knowledge in that just one magical single index. Thank you.
You want to take that one?
Sure, yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned that. When we learned about climate risk and using geospatial satellite imagery for financial, ESG and climate risk comes up a lot. And when it comes to climate risk, it's usually physical assets. But transitional risk, the kind of like reputation risk along with how a company is perceived as sustainable or not, or how do we get them to the next stage is also important. So to your point about carbon and methane emission, we are actively thinking about what role Planet can play as a data provider. So a great news is we are developing a new suite of constellation that's hyperspectral that allows us to look into the gas chemical composition of air. So it goes beyond our human visible band. So for the first time, or not the first time, but we have a tool now to look into what is the methane and what is the carbon emission coming out of different parts of the world. And to tie back to Bobby's point about we have more of the incentive of financial sector to share the asset level data so we can map them together. So we not only see what is the emission, but we can actually go down to see who is emitting it and who's owning that assets. Those will be new data sets that really get us next. And to your point, especially on the transitional risk. Yeah.
And Emily, I've got to imagine that has some impact on communities as well.
Oh yeah, I was actually going to mention while I was talking about local impacts is as part of the Rockefeller Foundation, we will be producing an air quality data set And so we'll be using satellite imagery, for example, what Lydia was talking about, as well as ground monitoring systems as well. And we'll be combining that using machine learning to produce that data set. And the whole goal of that is to really see how air quality interconnects with growth. What are the interconnected we're seeing there? How is this impacting health? What are certain ways we can drive investment decisions so that it is sustainable? But also, when we're talking about energy, and if we're talking about, for example, like a just transition, how do we make sure that we're keeping areas like Africa or those that are still developing growing, but also in mind with air quality, health considerations, and so that we provide investment decisions that are considering all those various avenues.
The one thing too, and then we'll get to your question, but I think, Chad, I would just love to double down the breakneck speed that this is changing. For me, it really feels like we have these amazing data originators. We have these amazing people that have subject matter expertise in climate science, but it's coming together with technically cloud infrastructure, where you just now finally have enough power to actually compute that data. And then you have amazing tools like Carto that can pull it out and do the visualizations that we're talking about. I mean, are you seeing that as well? I know Geospatial has taken off quite a bit inside Google as well.
Yeah, and to be honest, the whole data warehouse modernization or migration to cloud, that's one of the big business or technological trends of call it these 2 decades. Geospatial is kind of about 2 or 3 years behind where I see people migrating from Teradata to cloud or something like that, and so that's actually a really marvelous opportunity for folks in this room, because all of the cloud providers, right, Google among them, are investing billions, multiple tens of billions of dollars every year in this infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And just go back to your MBA days and okay, investment of that scale on this planet in a single common type of infrastructure, whether it's Google, AWS, whatever, that's a disruptive change. So that will provide capabilities to do, et cetera. And so it's really, somebody said the economy really drives it all. It does, right? That's multiple billions of dollars over decades that are changing how the world does compute and storage, and then really awesome people do really awesome stuff with that.
Right, these great insights. Anyone, I think there was one more out there.
Yeah, just a quick one. So I work at Guardian Life, mutual life company in the investments department. I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, sorry. So we need to manage our assets and liabilities, the liabilities being when you die, and the assets being how we're going to pay that liability. So the question is, how can we use climate data to help us do that, right? And we are only North American. And I'm curious on your thoughts on applying your experience in the mutual life environment.
Are any of you willing to answer that question while everybody's waiting for lunch, or no? That's a very complex one. It's a great question.
It's a very hard question. I'll just take a quick stab. I think there's definite application to all the groups here kind of speaking. Looking at climate and satellite data, I feel like there's aspects for the way that you look at the origination of insurances, from a profiling aspect of how you might, the level of insurance that they need from just that initiation, all the way to the reinsurance or the monitoring of that policy and how the environment could be affecting people in different communities or kind of different insurers. So I think there's a definite connection, and I think what's also really great about all this data is we're sitting on decades of information and history of data, which is also great from a financial aspect of training models and really validating insights and scores and things like that. So I think we could probably talk for hours on that conversation, but there's absolutely use cases.
I think some of us will be around too at the conference, so if you have any follow-on questions.